Hi, and welcome to Hiss and Tell, a cat behavior and more podcast. I'm your host, animal behaviorist Christina Wilson. Today is part 2 of my discussion with pet loss and grief counselor Beth Bigler about pet loss and grief. Today we talk about understanding the timeline of grief, ways that you can honor the memory of your pet, deciding when you could get another pet, preparing for milestone days, allowing your pets to be present during home euthanasia, and a bunch of other stuff. So I hope you'll join us and see you in the podcast. Are there any specific strategies or techniques that you recommend for coping with the loss of a pet? I don't know if we sort of covered this. Butters.
Hi, Butters. Hi, Butters.
Butters.
That was amazing.
Decided to come through squeaking.
And what do you think about it, Butters? You got some tips and tricks?
Butters.
So the question was, how can we support ourselves, when we're moving through this grief? Well, the number one thing I always have to remind people is to, and it's kind of a cliche, but it's feel your feelings, right? Feel them when they're coming up. Even if you feel like, oh, am I overreacting? Am I having is this too much? No, don't stuff them down. Let them out. Cry if you need to cry. Scream if you need to scream. Yell if you need to yell. Rage. Whimper. But the more you can release those and have those moving into the world, the more easily your grief is going to move through you. Grief is so bodily, and we want to just help it move through us. So however it needs to come out, through movement, through expression, through art, however you want to do it, feel those feelings and let them out. Another thing, say yes to anybody who offers to help. Like I was just saying about the protein shakes. People are going to text you and be like, do you need anything? I want you to be ready with an answer to that question. I want you to be able to say, yes, could you bring me over a donut? Or could you bring me over some mint tea? Or could you bring me over a game of Connect 4? Because I'm thinking about my childhood. Whatever it is, I want you to be ready with, yes, I'd love some help. Here's what you can do. And now, if the person doesn't do it, that's okay. But I want you to really try to be in touch with what would feel supportive. And for those people who are like, how can I help? Tell them how they can help. Working on our self-compassion. I've touched on it before, but I'm a broken record on this. Talk to yourself kindly. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. Talk to yourself the way your beloved talks to you. And whenever that negative voice is coming in, I want you to shoo that away and welcome in some self-compassion. This is so hard what you're going through. Be kind to yourself about it. And of course, I'm a big fan of memorializing and celebrating your beloved. However you want to do that. I love having celebrations of life. I love having art projects. I love building a memorial garden for them in all their signature colors. If you don't have a signature color for your animal, get one now and start making all kinds of choices in your life to bring that color into your life. Use their name at the coffee shop when you order coffee so you hear their name spoken aloud in the world. Share stories about them on social media and with your friends. Come head over to my monthly pet memorial service. I do a memorial service live on Instagram every month. You can submit your name and your beloved's name, and I'm going to read those out loud for everyone to celebrate that your animal has been an important person in your life. Do things that help you celebrate them, that help you memorialize them. Get some cool memorial jewelry. Get a cool portrait painted, right?
Yeah.
Do all those things that helps you feel connected. And of course, finding community, finding other people who get it, and not being afraid to invest in your grief. And by that I mean saying, okay, it's here. It's not something I'm going to stuff down. It's not something I'm going to shove away. I'm going to invite it in. I'm going to welcome the grief in. It's going to be here for a while. Let's get to know each other. Let's see what we learn about each other. And let's find a way to do this together. I think if we all could stop thinking about grief as such an enemy and think about it more as, an uneasy truce, we'd get a lot farther.
That's very true. Do you have any ideas for how pet owners can support their other pets who may also be grieving the loss of their companion? And I can hop in with stuff that I did for our cats, but I would love to hear if you have things that you recommend to people who may be living in multi-cat households.
Totally. I'm really eager to hear what you did, so I want to hear all about it. But in general, with our surviving animals, first of all, of course, they're grieving. Now, our research on this is not perfect. We don't have perfect research on how cats grieve. Hopefully we'll get more on that. But we do know that they're grieving. So a lot of people see very outward signs of that grief. They see searching behaviors. They see, surviving cats going into certain spots that the previous cat went into, all those kinds of things. So you may see it and it may look very obvious. You also may not see it and it may not look obvious, but that doesn't mean it's not happening, right? So I always just like to, let's acknowledge that. So a couple things I recommend for people is talk to your surviving animals. Talk to them about what's happening. And by the way, anticipatory people, talk to them about it before it happens too. And talk to them and say, hey, I know that you're grieving. I see these behaviors. It's hard. We're all grieving in this house. It's tough to be in a house full of grieving people. So I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you in that. Anything I can do, let me know. And hey, if you want to help me in my grief, I would love if you just want to come up and give me a little kiss now and then, or if you want to sleep in bed with me in Arnie's old spot, or whatever it is, right? Ask them to help you, and you tell them you're there to help them. Also reassure them everything's okay. You're doing all right. Nothing bad is happening here, right? Because we do know that animals can often get kind of anxious.
Yes.
And so we want to do what we can to talk to them about that. I also always love inviting in, it's two things. Keeping the routine the same, right? So even if you're struggling to kind of stay in your routine, try to keep the surviving animals' routine the same. But I also love inviting in kind of new activities, maybe something you haven't tried. Maybe you got a cat that you think would have a lot of fun with clicker training and you never tried that before. So, bringing in some new activities, some new kind of one-on-one time, especially if you have multiple surviving animals, kind of figuring out how you can sort of connect with each of them individually in whatever mode they like the best, I think is always like a nice thing to be thinking about. I do also tell people if you see anything that's making you nervous from a medical standpoint, your hypervigilance is already going to be raised because you've just been through a death. Go ahead and do a vet checkup if that feels supportive to you. If you think there's anything that you're seeing that you're nervous about, I always just recommend doing that once over because it might be good peace of mind for all of you. I also want to say about surviving animals that it's absolutely okay and valid if you have complex feelings about any of your surviving animals. When Arnie died, I had another cat in the home, Zelda, and she was not my favorite. And Arnie was my favorite. And talk about anger, I was angry that Arnie died, and I was stuck with Zelda. And the complexity around our surviving animals and the feelings we have is wide and vast. But if you're feeling any complexity about it at all, it's okay. You are not a bad guardian for feeling that way or having those feelings. And one thing that sometimes helps with that too is just really taking a minute to be grateful for who is there. So with Zelda, I really started a gratitude practice of just telling her every day, thank you for being here. I'm so glad you're here. And that helped me start building a deeper connection with her. And Zelda lived many more years after Arnie. She just died last year at the ripe old age of 19.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful that she was here for this time. I'm so grateful she's my link to Arnie. And our relationship grew and blossomed and changed in ways that it wouldn't have if Arnie had been here. So I just always like to honor complexity around surviving animals. But I really am curious, what did you do that was supportive?
Yeah, and I also just want to sort of normalize that what you were just saying, the complexity. When Butters joined the family, which was just a few months ago, and he was just one of the ferals that, we normally TNR, and we just didn't do the R part, but he fit in so well with everyone. We were like, okay, he's going to stay. And I really struggled. I really vacillated a lot between being so happy that he was here because he brought this physicality that was very similar to what Steve had in terms of just like being so like cuddly and physical and like very young and playful in a lot of the ways that Steve had been. And then being really angry because he wasn't Steve. Yeah. Right? And I still kind of go through that where I'm not angry with him, but I'm just kind of angry in general. Like he's not doing anything. He's like a nice dude. But sometimes I'm just like, ugh, like you're not Steve. And I've had to really sit with myself and kind of like you've said, like just be like, well, it's, this is probably normal. And I think it's okay. It's been very complex series of feelings, even as I see him kind of wake the house back up and get everybody sort of back on their feet. Steve's girlfriend left the bedroom in the 7 months since he passed until like Butters came in the house, and now she's like, oh, back out and about, which is great. Wow. But the things that I noticed in our guys were, he was the head of the house. And everyone knew he was sick. Obviously, he had cancer. And then by the end, like it was very obvious. They could all smell it, I think, from the very beginning. So there was a lot of support from all of them. They would lie around him. They would put their arms around him. Everyone just really rallied around him and loved him as much as, he'd given them love. And so it was no shock to them what happened. But once he passed, everyone was just really unmoored because there was no head of the house anymore. And they had all lost their best friend. And several of the boys had a lot of aggression towards each other because their sadness and their deep, deep grief was presenting as anxiety, which then turned into redirected aggression onto each other. And so I tried all of these things. I was like, I'm a behaviorist. It was giving everyone extra attention and playing with them more and upping the intellectual stimulation, making enrichment boxes. But none of that was keeping the two mainly from aggressing on each other. And so I had to go the psychopharmacological route, which, I never thought as a behaviorist I was going to have to do, but I ended up having, putting them on fluoxetine, which actually ended up being super, super helpful.
Great.
And I think was really needed in this time. So I also just want to normalize that for people, that if you have pets that you notice especially are becoming aggressive from grief, fluoxetine is very helpful. I would say within a week or two, there was a marked difference. There was no personality change, nothing else changed. It just helped them kind of come under threshold to be able to process everything in a way that they weren't able to before. And other than that, it was just really making sure to rotate, having new stuff, like you said, new experiences. Let's do new things. Let's have new toys. Let's have new smells. Let's try new foods. Let's just try to do anything to bring ourselves, because cats certainly, as these like very OCD animals, ruminate, I think, just as much as we do as humans, because they're not outside hunting and their brains are telling them, hey, you're kind of a shitty hunter. So like keep trying, and they're in our house. And so, that's all they have to do. So God forbid, like that's all they were doing was thinking about this a lot of the time. And they weren't eating as much. They were sleeping all the time. A lot of very similar signs and symptoms that we have as people. And so just trying to sort of reactivate them with anything that I possibly could. Once the weather improved, taking them out for harnessed walks. But it really wasn't until we, got Butters. Again, not something I recommend for people introducing a new cat right away. That's 7 months later, where I think they were at a point to receive that, where that was very helpful. But it's been a long road of everybody just really processing. And it's not just people who need a lot of time to process. Like I can tell they're all still really processing. It's been a huge ordeal for everybody.
Yeah. And that energy shift that you mentioned too, with Steve, I noticed that so much when Zelda died, like the whole energy in our whole house completely changed.
Yeah.
And, I have two young male cats, and Zelda was the grand dame, Zelda was the queen. And all of a sudden, all that energy was totally dissipated. And, my boys are young, and they were really trying to adjust to it. And I could see they were struggling. We were struggling. And that whole energy shift is a lot to take in. And so naturally, they're going to have different responses and reactions. But we can support them in that, And I think just feeling like, hey, we are all in this together, right? Like that's
absolutely
being a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really just sitting down and spending quality time with them, right? I think we're often so busy, that we don't have time to just sit on the floor and be with them at their level and maybe not do anything, right?
Yep.
But just sit there and quietly exist, I think is so valuable to them. That is a cat's love language, is to just sit and stare at nothing, just be, right? And I think that is such a valuable thing to do if you're able to even put 10, 15 minutes into that every day. Yes. I think that goes a really long way into kind of sharing space and sharing vibes with your cat.
Totally. And telling stories about your beloved to them and with them, like that's such a beautiful thing that I encourage people to do. Tell the Steve stories, tell Butters all the Steve stories, right? All the legendary things. Tell the other cats about their relationship, with Steve and your memories of that, and, keeping their name going. Like, when I say Zelda's names, my two young boys, their ears perk right up, they know we're talking about Zelda. And I love, kind of bringing our beloveds in that way, and keeping them part of the family through this, legacy storytelling family tree. And I love, introducing Butters to Steve. What fun is that?
So one of the last questions I have before we get to all of the listener questions is how can pet owners honor the memory of their cat and kind of keep their spirit alive in their hearts and homes? And I know we've touched a little bit on this here and there, but maybe you can talk about some ways that you have found your clients have success with honoring the memory of their cats.
Well, like I've said, I'm a big believer in keeping our beloveds included in our daily life, and all the many different ways we can do that. It's pretty much like what I post about every day on Instagram, right?
Right. Yeah.
But how do we, how can you adopt a mindset of I'm in collaboration with Steve all the time. So Steve and I are doing this and Steve and I are doing that. And when I choose things, that remind me of Steve, and it's there's kind of a mindset thing here, right? It's like, so talking about them, sharing them, asking their advice for things when things get hard, and like seeing what you hear back, taking time in your day to just actively sort of connect with them and to think about it. Like when I go to an appointment, if I'm a few minutes early, rather than sit there and scroll on my phone, I just take a couple minutes and I close my eyes and I connect in with Arnie, and I get to hang out with him in that time, right? And I ask him for help with things. I ask him for guidance. I bounce ideas off him. I was like, what do you think about this, right? And that is so supportive, to me and to many of my clients. And also, the gifts, the guidance, the lessons, the teachings, y'all hear me talk about this all the time. Take some time to reflect. What did my beloved bring into my life? What are some of the things I learned, and how can I carry that legacy into the world? Because we all know we are better because of them. We know so many things about loving and being loved, accepting love, being worthy, being kind, that we didn't know before, or that hadn't been reinforced in that way. And so these gifts that we have been given, they continue with us, and we get to take those into the world and share those with others. My perspective on my work now, Arnie and I are doing this together, and I'm showing up for people like Arnie never failed to show up for me. And so finding your way, however your way is with your beloved, to bring that legacy into the world and carry their mission forward is so life affirming, and it keeps them with you all the time, and it keeps you giving to the world as they gave to you. And in that way, they are forever with you.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the big driver of this podcast is Steve. I absolutely wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for him. So
exactly. Well, but isn't that it? Isn't that just it? And is that supportive to your grief?
Yes. So fair enough. Steve's followers ask me, like, when should they think about getting another pet? Like, what is the right time for that? Do you have thoughts about that? I know that's like a deeply personal thing for each individual.
I have a lot of thoughts.
Okay, let her rip.
This is a tough topic.
Yeah.
This really is a tough topic. And I feel very differently about it than I did when I first started doing this work.
Okay.
To be totally transparent. I used to sort of think, because I hadn't seen as much as I've seen now, like, like whenever it feels good to you, my mantra about everything in grief is, if it feels supportive, do it, right? And if it doesn't feel supportive, don't do it. So I used to kind of think, and look, I have encountered people who've adopted the next day, and it's been great. But the longer I do this, and the more I work with people, and now these are people coming to me for grief counseling for their beloved, and that is not everybody.
Right.
But my new sort of feeling on it is, newer feeling on it is that we really want to make sure that we feel really, really, really ready. And if you have no's going on, if you have some no's happening, even if you think it might be good for your surviving animals, even if you think you should be ready or it should be time, even if there's other people in your household who want to do it, if you have no's going on in your heart, I want you to listen to the no and not do it until those no's are gone. Because unfortunately, when we adopt an animal too soon, and that too soon is different for everybody, but when we adopt an animal, when we still have a lot of no's in our heart, or maybe we're still stuck in our grief, or we think it's going to help our grief, we end up with a lot of comparison. We end up with a lot of, why aren't you more like this? Right. And you know what we must be prepared for when we welcome a new family member? We must be prepared that cat is going to be the polar opposite of Arnie or Steve. We have to be ready for that. And when we're deep in grief and we still have no's, we are not ready for that. We have to be ready that animal might have a medical condition, even if they're young. And we might have to mount up for a big medical fight or a financial thing. And a lot of us coming out of what we've been through in anticipatory, we are not ready for that, right? And so I have seen just a lot of heartache with people I've worked with who've adopted before a lot of those no's were feeling more resolved. So I really just encourage people to listen to the no's. Now, here's the caveat.
Yeah.
A no is different than grief.
Right.
And when we welcome a new family member, grief comes up, right? Because there's nothing that stirs up our grief like, wow, if I'm welcoming a new family member, it means that Steve is never coming home or Arnie is never coming home. So we gotta be careful that it's not like our grief. But a lot of people I know have no's, but they feel like they shouldn't have no's, and then they do it, and it doesn't go well. In fact, I have a lot of people come to me to work with me only around this issue. They didn't work with me in their grief, but they've adopted a new animal, and they're having a miserable time, and they want my help, navigating that because the grief is involved. So I just tell people, I don't have any recommended timeline for this, but I really urge people to really check in with their readiness and to really sit with, do I really feel ready? And am I ready if this animal is nothing like the one that I had? Am I ready if this animal has a medical challenge? Am I ready to kind of release my expectations? And then we're getting more in the ballpark. So it's really just something that I encourage people to take a lot of time with, to really sit with, and to really consider deeply. Because when you've lost a soulmate pet, it's a huge thing to bring something different into your orbit.
It is. It is. Well, let's move on to our listener questions. Right. So the first one is, when is the best time to contact a grief counselor and how to go about finding one?
Whenever you want. I mean,
fair.
Look, I hope everybody, if you're having a hard time with anticipatory grief, please don't delay reaching out to someone who can help you with that. I really want to validate and normalize. Let's get support on the anticipatory side, right? Mm-hmm. I will say this. If I work with you on the anticipatory side, your post-loss grief is going to be a little easier than if you had not come to me on the anticipatory side. So I highly recommend jump in on the anticipatory whenever you can. I think the question may be asking, like, at what point, we touched on this earlier, like, at what point do I need to see someone? And I don't know. I don't know. I think we all need it, right? So I think if the thought has crossed your mind, it's time to reach out and speak with someone, right?
Right.
And there's all kinds of different people who do this work, although there's not very many people who only do this type of work. So I would really encourage you, if you're looking, I love therapists. Do not get me wrong. I'm a big fan of therapists. Been in therapy my whole life. But a lot of therapists don't have any training in grief whatsoever. They certainly don't have any training in this kind of grief. So, I would recommend really looking for someone who specializes specifically in grief, and better yet, animal grief, and someone who's worked with a lot of people, who has a lot of experience and expertise to understand this. Because there are some people who do this, they see a couple people, here and there, and they have not seen a whole variety of types of situations. Right. And every situation is very different. So I think, and then it's a vibe check, just like finding any mental health professional. It's kind of like dating. You gotta talk to someone, have an initial conversation with them, see how it feels, and try to assess if you think they can help you. So, but I think if the thought has crossed your mind, do I maybe need to see someone? I think it's time to call. That would be my advice.
Is there a special certification or training that people should look for when they're looking for a pet loss grief counselor?
No, because people doing this kind of work are coming from all kinds of different backgrounds and trainings. I mean, there are licensed clinical therapists who've done additional certifications in pet loss grief counseling. There are end-of-life death doulas who may also have a certification in grief counseling. I think education and training is far less important than you feeling like you're connecting with someone who really gets you and gets what you're going through, because there is no standardized education for pet loss grief counseling. I mean, there's different places that offer different programs, but there's not a standardized thing, right? So I think it's far more important. I'm always more impressed with am I listening to you? Am I hearing what you're saying? Do I feel like you can help me? Than where you went to school or what your training is. But obviously, I would recommend working with people who've done some certifications, done some trainings, who clearly have experience and longevity. There's a lot of people jumping into this work right now. It's becoming kind of popular, but they simply haven't seen very many people, and I have seen a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds, probably more than that at this point. And you need to have seen a lot of different scenarios to really be able to support a lot of different scenarios.
That tracks. Okay. So another person asks, how do we overcome the guilt of moving on? Which I guess is a little bit different than the guilt that we already talked about.
Well, I don't use the word moving on.
Okay.
So I'll try to interpret that how I think the question is being asked. I don't think this is something we move on from.
Yeah.
Or, I used to say move through a lot. I still kind of say move through. I don't really like that anymore. I like move with. We move with this grief. We move with the sorrow. I'm still grieving Arnie. I wish he were here, right? So, but what I think the question, that's just a semantics thing. But, I think when we tell ourselves we are moving on, or we're, let's just dispel that, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not moving on. There's no such thing as moving on. Like, we're moving with it. It's coming with us, right? So, but I think like what a lot of people mean when they say this, it's like, some people, the version is like, I feel guilty because I haven't cried in a week, right? Or I feel guilty because I just went and had a nice vacation. I didn't really think about my grief.
Yes.
Or I welcomed a new dog and I'm totally in love with my new dog. And, am I betraying? And I mean, I think in addition to all the other things we've said about guilt, I think what you really want to remember here is who you are with your beloved, right? Who this is with you, like you and Steve, right? The essence of you and Steve together, all that trust and loyalty and devotion and acceptance and hilarity, right? And that relationship, it's perfect, it's protected, it's eternal. It cannot be betrayed. You cannot betray your beloved and your life with them. The only thing, in my view, that's a betrayal of that is self-harm and self-destruction, and we're not doing any of that. So your beloved is with you. Your beloved is moving with you as you do these things. Your beloved is with you to help you welcome home that new animal. Your beloved is with you as you go on that vacation and you get a sign from them, and that orange butterfly pops up and you're like, hey, Arnie, right? So I think, you are not betraying your love and your relationship if your life is naturally evolving. And why don't you bring them along with you and let them enjoy all of this new life with you?
A lovely answer.
Thanks. We're here to be lovely.
You're doing a great job. A+ in lovely.
Thank you.
A+. So somebody else wrote, can you talk about the overwhelming sadness that just hits you out of nowhere at random times and why that is?
Oh, that's a long answer.
Yes.
I'll keep it short. Look, there's a lot of brain things that happen about when we get hit with those, I call them clobbers, but people call them grief wave, grief burst. My therapist calls them grief pinatas, right?
Oh.
I know, she's so good, but she says I can use it, so thanks.
Does candy fall out?
Right? I think grief falls out, sweetie.
Oh, that's not fun.
Grief, anger, sadness, despair, longing, loneliness, right? Those are all the candies. Well, they're the worst, right? And we all know what those are. My worst one ever happened in a grocery store. I was walking down the aisle. Arnie happened to die on the last day of the first trimester of my pregnancy, which meant he was never going to meet my son Earthside, and that was a massive devastation to me. And a few months after that, I was in the grocery store. I was going to get some yogurt. I was very visibly pregnant at that point, and I'm walking down the aisle, and I'm heading to the yogurt, and all of a sudden I realize I'm in the pet aisle, which I don't think I had been in since Arnie died. I look over at the litter, and it says, it's one of the litters. It says multi-cat litter, right, for a multi-cat household. And I had this thought, I'm no longer a multi-cat household. And even now, just saying it, I know.
Yeah.
I burst into tears, and worse than that, I fell. I fell to my knees. It was like so dramatic. And I could not stop crying about the fact that I would no longer need multi-cat litter. And of course, now I'm very pregnant. People are running over. They think I'm having a baby. It was mortifying, the whole thing. But, my worst kind of grief burst moment, that happened in a grocery store. So those come out of nowhere sometimes. And, for the ones we can anticipate, right? Like major milestone days, gotcha day, adoption days, birthdays, major holidays, we can prepare for those. And I'm a really big fan of helping people figure out ways to kind of prepare for some of those moments that we're going to get those clobbers and so I'm bringing that up because one of the things that helps is that if we are more prepared for the moments, the places, the, triggers, some people like that word, that we're going to encounter, and we kind of have plans for how to handle those, it makes these, like the kind of the ones we can't stop,
right,
feel less oppressive as opposed to if it's just happening all the time.
Yeah.
And for these, again, being kind, being gentle, being supportive to ourselves, saying, this is really hard. I'm going through such a hard thing. When I get these, because I still get them time to time, I ask Arnie for help. I'm like, Arnie, can you just help me through this? Can we just breathe together for a second? I'm trying to breathe and ground and remind myself that, this is so painful. This is so hard. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm remaining in connection. I'm living in love with Arnie. And I go to gratitude if I can. I'm grateful. I'm so grateful to love Arnie and to be loved by Arnie. As hard as this is, it's the best thing in the world. And that helps me when I have those moments.
So if people know that they have like one of those milestones coming up, what are some things that they can do to prepare for that?
Totally. Well, first of all, no matter what preparations we make, we don't know how we're going to feel on the day. So one thing I like to say is like, I advise, prepare, make plans, get things ready to do. And if you feel like doing nothing but staying in bed, stay in bed, right? So we don't want these days to turn into like to-do lists or things we have to do. And if I don't do it, I'm letting my animal down, right? So we gotta be careful around that. But I kind of have like 4 pillars, as I like to think of them, as things to think about with milestone anniversaries. One is I always recommend doing something special that helps you feel connected to your beloved on that day. So whatever that is for you, if it's doing something special in the house that Steve would totally enjoy. If it's setting up like a cool area of, cardboard where, all the cats can get in and play with the cardboard because that's like Steve's favorite thing. Just doing something that like connects you to your beloved, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe that's writing a letter to them. Maybe that's, doing something beautiful with some of their toys or whatever you want to do, doing an art project, just something that makes you feel connected. So that's one thing. Another thing is I say share on milestone days. Share that it is a milestone day, whether that's sharing on social media, making a post, or just texting a friend with a photograph and saying, hey, this is what Arnie looked like on his gotcha day. It's his gotcha day today. I just wanted you to see. Share it with someone. Or maybe that's making a dinner of all of Steve's favorite foods, and that's the theme for the night, and you have a dinner with some friends where you're doing that. So sharing in some way with at least one other person. I also recommend doing an act of kindness or doing an act of service for a person or an animal in need. My clients are very creative on this front, but anything from buying coffee for the person behind you and having the barista say it's from your animal. That's Jamie's mom, Isabel. She does that, which is so beautiful. Jamie's mom, Isabel, also will go to like PetSmart on a milestone day for Isabel and kind of chat up with other guardians there and then pick out a toy and give them a toy for their beloved from Isabel, right? And just doing those little things, this act of kindness, act of love in the world is a great legacy act. And then a fourth component, I think, is just doing something nice for yourself. What feels nurturing and nourishing to you. And that's different for everyone. For some people, it might be going for a walk. For some people, it might be a massage. For some people, it might be getting yourself a bouquet of flowers in their signature color. Cat-safe flowers, of course. Yes. But, whatever it is, also just doing something a little extra nice for you on that day. And I think those 4 things, kind of thinking about those before a milestone can be really supportive and give you some things to do to honor, acknowledge, and celebrate your beloved on those milestones.
Those are great ideas, and I'm going to make sure that we do all of them. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Totally. And one thing about milestones I will also say is to really check in about what does this day mean to me? Because we don't check in about that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially like, transition days, death days, death anniversaries. A lot of people feel like, well, I don't even like calling it an anniversary because I don't want to celebrate. I'm not celebrating, that my beloved died. And I'm like, okay, well, what does the day mean to you? And how do you want it to be in the world, right? Because we get to define what these days mean. So like some people really do a big celebration on Gotcha Day or their beloved's birthdays. And for some people, the like death transition day is kind of like more muted, more of like an acknowledgement day. For me, the last few years, I call Arnie's transition day Arnie Day, and I do giveaways and I do nice things for people in the vet med community. And I try to like kind of give back. It's kind of a give back day for me. But I think taking some time to just think, okay, what does the milestone mean to me, and how do I feel how to feel that I'm acknowledging it about what it actually means for me? It doesn't have to mean the same thing to anyone else or culturally. It's got to mean it for you. I think that's really powerful when we think about milestone days.
I don't know why that one got me. I think just my resolve is like it's weakening as we go on. Okay.
It's okay to cry, right? Those sadness tears are good for you. They are soothing.
I'm Scandinavian. Now we're discussing my upbringing, and that's not okay.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Seriously. I shed like 2 tears at my grandmother's funeral, and my family were like, what's wrong with you? What is this on your face? Suck it up, buttercup. I was like, oh, okay, I'm very sorry. So anyway.
That's so many different households too. That is not just Scandinavia.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
no.
a whole
it's
lot
just,
of places.
Yeah.
Oof.
It's just very traditional over there. It's just like,
Yes.
no,
I understand.
you're strong only. Anyway, someone else asked, I think we know the answer to this, obviously, but can you have PTSD from pet loss?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
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 Sure. Of course, I'm not a licensed clinical therapist, right? I'm a double certified grief counselor. I'm a death doula. I'm a pet chaplain. So I can't diagnose anybody with PTSD or CPTSD or anything like that. That's outside of my purview. If someone comes to me and, really presents to me with things that I think are out of my scope, I'm going to send them to a licensed clinical therapist who specializes in trauma, right? Having said that, I've worked with a lot of people who have certain things going on that we would associate as sort of, like symptoms, right? But, like having like that recurring thought of like the end, that isn't necessarily PTSD. That could be like, that's an intrusive thought coming in because that's like a thing I'm thinking about, right? So there's a lot of people who say, I know I have PTSD. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I can't diagnose you, but let's kind of work together and see if we can dial down some of those symptoms that like feel like PTSD, right? Because, a lot of us don't have a complex understanding of what PTSD actually looks like or what it actually is, right? So there's some people who are walking around thinking they have it and maybe they don't. And, if you're worried about it, please go see someone, see if you can get a diagnosis. We have come so far in treating PTSD. There's so many options. So I'm a big fan of getting appropriate support if you have it. So can any kind of trauma cause PTSD? Of course. And a lot of things we go through when we experience this kind of grief can give us that. And again, if you think that's happening to you, seek support. There's a lot of support for that. And I work with a lot of people, I like when my clients are already in therapy working on things. So I work with a lot of people who are already working with therapists on other parts of life and PTSD. And then we work together specifically around their grief about their beloved. And it's a really nice in tandem thing to be doing, to have a space to go just to kind of focus on your pet loss. And if you are having other things going on about PTSD, to be working through that, with a licensed clinical therapist who specializes in trauma.
Right. Is there any benefit in allowing your other pets to be present during or after home euthanasia?
Well, again, this is an area where I don't believe we have concrete research to back this up, because this is not a heavily researched thing. But I can tell you, having talked to numerous in-home euthanasia veterinarians, other veterinarians, and anecdotally working with lots and lots of clients about this, and in my own experience, the general feeling is that it's a great idea to let your other animals experience that their sibling has died. Now, sometimes having other animals present during the actual euthanasia itself can be distracting for the guardian. It can create more chaos. It can be overwhelming. So a lot of people I work with choose to maybe have their cats in a place where they're not going to enter the room, or if they have dogs, keep the dogs out of the house. But I always recommend to my clients, if it's comfortable for them, to allow, after the completion of the euthanasia, to let those other animals come in and smell. Anecdotally, of course, we know that many animals want to come and smell and sniff and spend time with the body and so forth. And I like to normalize that not every animal is going to do that. There may be some animals who don't want to engage with it. That's okay. We don't want to force that. A lot of people ask me, should I put my cat up to, I get that question a lot. And absolutely not. We want to let everyone do everything on their own terms. And if you are not comfortable with it, if it's causing you pain for some reason, we also have to take that into consideration, right? So even though it's something that I recommend, it doesn't mean like if you aren't up for it or it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And I also got to validate with this kind of question, you may be in a situation where you can't do it.
Right.
And that was me. When Arnie came to the completion of his life, I could not get him home for an in-home euthanasia. It was not safe medically to transport him. And I so desperately wanted him to be able to get home and say goodbye to Zelda. It was so important to me. And I felt so sad, not guilty. I felt sad that it couldn't be that way. And but it wouldn't have been safe, right? And so I didn't get to do that. And that's okay too. If you're not able to, that's not your fault. You didn't do a bad thing. You did the best you could. Yeah. But in my experience, I recommend it. How did you handle it in your house?
We had an at-home euthanasia. Our best friend and Steve's, longtime vet, until, from before we moved up here to Connecticut, came all the way from New York City, to be here with us and to handle it. And, we had just all the cats around, but they knew what was going on. So it was no surprise to them, but nobody ended up being in the room when it happened. And no one was interested in being around after. I just think they knew for months what was coming.
Yep.
That day, I think it was pretty obvious. We had given him pretty heavy sedation before the vet arrived. And so I think they had just kind of been like, okay, like they knew the jig was up, so to speak. And I think they just sort of removed themselves from that situation. And it's not like they didn't know what happened. They obviously all knew what happened. There was no even like seeking behavior from anybody. They all knew.
Yep.
And so it was totally up to them. They could have come in at any point, but nobody wanted to. And that was it.
My two cats, one was very interested when, because I did in-home for Zelda, one was very interested when the veterinarian arrived. The other one totally disappeared.
Yeah.
And he was very like checking and he seemed to know, and he did leave. So neither one of mine were present. They had the option, but one of my boys was super interested in the pre-part. And funnily enough, afterward, I had them both. They had access and they did want to come down and they both did want to like check out her body. And the one who had been so interested before was not interested now after like one sniff. And then the other one was very interested. Right. And so their behavior was totally opposite in that moment. And so, but I think we do. I mean, I think the understanding is like, if it's an option, give the option.
Yeah.
Right.
We were totally open for them. Obviously, we're all the same family, for them to come and go as they pleased and whatever they were comfortable with. And again, knowing that they just knew what was going on, was totally up to them. And Steve was completely out of it. So it's not like he felt or didn't feel supported by them, because he was high on a lot of stuff. So
totally. I'm so glad.
Yes.
I'm happy for Steve.
Morphine.
So comfortable.
Yes. And so the last question from a listener is, how do you deal with, was it the right time doubt?
Oh, the fantasy. Oh, the fantasy that there's a perfect time.
Yeah.
If I do nothing else today, I just want to validate for every single person that you do not need to feel 100% perfect about that day and time that you chose. I think, again, like social media, I love social media. It's a great place for a lot of things, but sometimes there's just like narrative, like I felt so great. It was the perfect death. It was the perfect time. I work with hundreds and hundreds of people. Very few people are like, yeah, that was definitely the exact right moment, right? And I think we have to release this expectation that we're going to have this like, I did it perfectly thing. I mean, just about all of it, right?
Yeah.
So, making a decision around euthanasia, which is something I spend a lot of time with people on, it's so complex. There are so many factors at play, and we are navigating through very complex medical things that are happening. We are navigating through quality of life questions that are happening. And, there's all kinds of things people say about this. Better a week too soon than a day too late. Trying to, assess like, well, if your animal can't do these 3 things, then it's time. And I don't know that any of us ever feel 100% that it's the exact perfect time. I think questioning like, well, could we have done it in another day? Could we have done it a day sooner? Yeah, sure. That's probably all true. If you're having those questions, the end result is that you made a euthanasia decision because your beloved had a medical condition that wasn't going to improve and it was going to get worse. And by having a compassionate euthanasia choice, you avoided a catastrophe. You avoided further suffering if there was suffering. You avoided a traumatic experience that could arise if you don't have a compassionate euthanasia. And so reminding yourself of the reasons why you chose, when you chose, and reminding yourself of what was actually happening, and that buying one more day perhaps could have been possible, but it may not have had the result that you wanted if you had had that one more day. We like to fantasize that if we'd had that one more day, maybe things would have been different. But the truth is, the reason we got to this place of the compassionate euthanasia is because there was a condition that wasn't going to improve, and you offered an act of kindness to stop suffering. So to try to remind yourself of that when you get into that loop. Also, ask your beloved. Do you think it was too soon? See what they have to say about it. Might be an interesting dialogue to have.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been such a good but difficult but important discussion. And I only say difficult just because I'm still very much in grief. So it's been a lot to hear and discuss, but I hope is going to be helpful for people to hear. And I really thank you for your service and for being here today to talk about all of this, for helping so many people, for sharing everything that you shared today. I think it was all so helpful.
Well, thank you so much. It was brave of you to do this while you're still in your grief over Steve. So I commend you for doing it.
I really, like I said before, I really feel like this is part of his legacy is now me just doing all this stuff. So I just do it.
Well, for that, I got to say, thank you, Steve. Thank you for creating this legacy. Thank you for helping create this space. It's helping so many of us, those of us who love kitties, have a space to explore. So thanks, Steve.
Yes, that's all thanks to him, because I don't like social media and I never would have been on it other than to be like, look at my super cool cat. You know?
That's about the best reason ever to be on social media.
I feel like it's the only reason, right? I'm like, why else would I be on here, right? And then now I'm still on it because I'm like, well, I had the super cool cat and I have to continue, with his legacy and message. So
that's it.
Yes, I'm still on this. Now I just got to put my dumb face on there too.
Well, whatever. Steve loved your face, so that's also part of your legacy.
Yes, I guess that's a whole other thing to untangle at another date.
That's another episode.
That's more than an episode. That's like, it's a multi-season debacle.
I think it's actually life work.
Yeah, I agree. As a Western woman, that's just like, can we ever unlearn our self-hatred? Anyway, that's somebody else's podcast. That is not my problem.
Not our problem. We got enough of that going on in our grief.
Yes, and I am an animal therapist, not a human one. So I love it. That's enough of that. But anyway, how can people reach you, find out about you, contact you if they want to avail themselves of your services? For sure.
Yeah. Well, first of all, come on over to my Instagram at Honoring Our Animals. Every month, like I mentioned, I do this live memorial service. I'd love to have anyone listening submit for that. Doesn't matter how long it's been since your loss. It's a beautiful time to come together for reflection and connection and community and to hear your beloved recognized and honored. So I'd love to have any of you join that. I do that every month. I also have a website, honoringouranimals.com. I have a weekly newsletter I put out with content for both anticipatory and post-loss grief. And of course, there you can also find out more information on working with me, either one-on-one or in small groups. And also, I just encourage everyone to spread the word about normalizing and validating pet loss grief. That's the mission that I'm on. I want to empower animal grievers. So even if you're not in the position of grieving an animal yet, think about next time someone is going through a loss in your circle, just reaching out to them, treating the loss the same as you would as if it were a human, and continuing to be a strong ally to all animal grievers. That's the best thing we can do to change this cultural conversation. So I look forward to seeing all of you.
All right. Thank you again so much. And that's it. Thanks for being on Hiss and Tell.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, please go ahead and give us a rating and or a review. We'd super appreciate it. You can find our social medias, Instagram and TikTok at Hiss and Tell Podcast. For cat behavior consultations, go to catitude-adjustment.com. Music provided by Cat Beats.